I've got a mixed history with feline Pokemon. One of my aunts had a Perugly when I was younger that, let's just say, it really didn't like young kids, so there aren't a lot of good memories there. Never did like that Pokemon anyway. But then one of my friends growing up was actually from the Galar region, and they had a Galarian Meowth, which, while cantankerous, was awesome to play and run around with. And that's the general vibe of feline Pokemon. Almost everyone has at least interacted with one before, and they are truly everywhere. And today, we're going to be talking about the Cantonian Meowth line. Hello and welcome everyone to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we talk about how you would care for and raise certain Pokemon lines in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the feline Pokemon Meowth and its evolution Persian. Meowth is a 1-foot tall, 9-pound feline Pokemon, with a light cream-colored body, brown on its back feet and tail, and black ears. It also has a large golden coin situated in the center of its forehead, signifying its obsession with shiny things. And, contrary to popular belief, most Meowth do not walk on their hind legs. There have been a few recorded individuals that do so, but the majority of the species is quadrupedal. As is their evolution, Persian, which comes with a major size increase, now being 3 foot tall at the shoulder and averaging around 70.5 pounds. It keeps the cream-colored coat, but loses the brown and black markings. It also trades in the shiny golden coin on its forehead for a small round gemstone. It might look majestic and beautiful, but make no mistake, this thing is a large predator cat, a top of the food chain carnivore, and it will change how you keep and interact with this Pokemon evolution. But we'll get into all that later on in the guide. For now, let's get into it and find out if these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. The nice part about Meowth specifically is that they make great house pets, once they're trained of course, which we'll talk about in the care section. But if you take the time to train and socialize your Meowth, then just the average house or apartment makes a great place for them to live. Now, mind, that's not to say they won't need anything. Felines like the Meowth line are very vertical Pokemon, meaning they like to hang out in high spots, jump up to places where they can get a good vantage point, and things like that. As well, they need to scratch, as it allows them to stretch out their muscles, wear down their claws, and when in the wild, they use it to mark their territory. You'll never be able to stop them from scratching completely, but you can get them to recognize specific spots that are for scratching. Both of these needs can be satisfied through use of a cat tower. These are cat toys made of multiple platforms and poles, allowing your Meowth, or any other feline Pokemon you have, to jump up and climb to their heart's content. As well, most cat towers come with a scratchy place that your cat will love to sink their claws into. It's the best of both worlds. As well, you're going to need to get a litter box for your Pokemon. This is where they'll be going to the bathroom. For the very few of you that don't know, a litter box is a plastic box that you can fill with litter, which is a specific material that clumps when your Pokemon uses the litter box. You'll have to scoop the litter box and refill the litter quite often, as your cat Pokemon won't like using it if it starts to get too full. Also, just a heads up, litter boxes can start to smell, and I mean bad enough that it's going to fill the whole room that it's in. Luckily, consistent scooping every day and getting a litter that helps with odor control can mitigate the smell issue. But overall, a Meowth isn't that bad to care for. However, this all completely changes when you start to look at Persian. As we said before, Persian is a big Pokemon, and not only that, it's a big predator. Seriously, Meowth might just be a carnivore, but Persian is designed to hunt. They can actually be a problem in larger cities if enough stray Meowth aren't caught before they evolve. But anyway, with Persian, I would have to recommend that you not keep them in your house. One, they are big Pokemon, and they don't lose the need to climb and jump. Very few people outside of the very rich have a big enough house to home a Persian with no issues. And 2, these Pokemon are temperamental and can scratch and pounce on anything and anyone. So not only is it a danger to small Pokemon you may have around the house, but it's also a danger to furniture, to small children, and even to adults like you and me. Those claws will come out for very, very little reason. Mind you, this is all if you don't train them rigorously as a Meowth. If you have trained them, and they listen to you, and you have at least some place for them to go that they can jump to and lay down, then you may be able to keep a Persian in your house. But I'm still going to give you an outside enclosure, as I think that would be for the best for both you and your Persian. The first thing you'll need is a minimum of 200 square feet of land. This will be the inside of the enclosure. You can have the dimensions be anything you like within reason, no 1 by 200 enclosures. But as long as the area equals 200 square feet, then you should be good. Secondly, you'll need walls. These can be anything from mesh to glass to even concrete and stone. I personally like the mesh as it lets a nice breeze in, but do keep in mind that these are jumping and climbing cats. So if they can sink their claws into the mesh, they will climb it. Which also brings up the next point, which is the ceiling. The enclosure should be fully enclosed to prevent them from climbing and jumping their way out. The ceiling should be made of the same material as the walls, though depending on the shape of the enclosure and the material you need, it may need some structural support, so keep an eye on that. Inside of the enclosure, you should supply a few things. One is that you should have climbing and jumping places. So rocks, logs, platforms that can function as sunning spots for them. You should also provide them some shady spots for them to relax in as well. Covered areas where they can get away from the sun and sleep under there. Lastly is that with this outside enclosure, you should provide a small offshoot, almost like a small room, where these Pokemon can enter into and sleep. It provides a level of security and safety for them. You should also have a way to separate the small offshoot room from the rest of the enclosure. Via a sliding wall or locking doors, this way you're able to go in and clean and do other things without worrying about the Pokemon coming after you. Remember, this whole outside enclosure setup is for you if you end up with a Persian without significant training as a Meowth. As for entrances into the enclosure for you, there'll be 2 of them. One main door that you can use to enter the main area of the enclosure. This door should be heavily reinforced and locked so that your Pokemon can't get out by accident. Remember, we're talking about a very strong and very big predator, and if not properly trained when young, they can be a real danger to others. So you don't want them accidentally getting out and wandering town. Now, the other entrance should be in that small side room that we talked about, the one that will allow your Pokemon to hide away from the world. One of the walls should be a door as well, and this is the door that you'll feed your Pokemon from, and give it water. Which, by the way, there should be 2 water dishes in this enclosure, one in the small room and one out in the big part of the enclosure now that I'm mentioning it. As for the last part, Meowth can be housed fairly well together. I mean, we all know that one crazy cat lady that lives in our town that has way too many cat Pokemon. Sure, there are individual felines that don't like other cats, and they aren't like canine Pokemon where they need companionship, but housing many of them together shouldn't be too bad of an idea. As for Persian, well, that's again a different story. Major feline predators like that don't tend to stick together, the Pyroar line not counted. They may be able to be kept in pairs, but that really depends on the 2 individuals involved. Some Persians just won't stand for it. And always keep in mind that I only give you specifications for 1 Pokemon per enclosure. If you do plan on getting more, be sure to do your research and expand accordingly. Availability. Meowth is very available. Just like most any other feline Pokemon, they are wildly abundant and very popular. And as you may know, Meowth specifically is so abundant in the wild that most towns and cities actually have a problem with populations of wild Meowth living on the streets. This is because of a few things, namely them being very well adapted to living in an urban environment and the fact that they breed very rapidly. They can take over an entire neighborhood in a matter of months. They can be very territorial and have no problem scratching anyone they don't like, which is most people. But the real problem is that if they're left in the wild too long, then you run the risk of one of the Meowth evolving into a wild Persian, which can be a major public health risk to have such a large predator claim a section of town as their territory. So this danger of having such a large predator loose on the streets means that most towns and cities have initiatives to catch any wild Meowth they come across, fix them so they can't breed, and then place them as shelter for adoption. Now, this means that a Meowth is readily available, especially if you're looking for a wild caught one. Just go to one of the shelters and adopt one. It's a minor fee, and they usually even throw in a free Everstone collar. I mean, you could also catch one yourself, but then you'll have to spay and neuter it yourself in accordance with town ordinance, which that could be pricey. Also, no free collar. Persian, though, is another story. Since the goal is to catch the Meowth before they evolve, then this leads to a major shortage in the wild Persian market. Most Meowth get caught and collared before they can evolve, so the ones that do manage to evade capture and evolve are the most wild and vicious ones, the ones that are willing to put up a fight and hunt for most prey. So I don't recommend trying to catch a wild Persian at all. There is a reason that these Pokemon are sent off to sanctuaries instead of the adoption shelters. Moving on to the breeder scene, it's pretty much the exact same. You can find plenty of breeders that have long lineages of Meowth lines, or even people that got a pet Meowth that happened to not be fixed and had kittens by accident. They are very easy to find in the breeder market. Persian, though, nobody really sells Persian. I mean, you can find someone who'll sell you one, but make sure that it's well trained enough that someone can just keep them as a pet. The kind of breeder that's willing to put in that kind of work with a Pokemon that's as dangerous as that just to sell them means that you won't find them often, and the ones that you do find will not be anywhere close to cheap. Care. If it hasn't been abundantly clear, these Pokemon are carnivores. They eat purely meat, despite the fact that they do munch on plants from time to time. That's usually because they are bored or they need some roughage to push something through their digestive tract, usually a hairball. But diet-wise, they only eat and require meat. The best kind of meat is going to be poultry, something like Pidgey or P-Dove. You'll also have to include some vitamins or supplements such as calcium, to supplement what they would naturally get through hunting prey. As for the amount, the average Meowth will get between a third to a half a cup of food a day, usually split between 2 meals, morning and night. The best way to do this is to have a dish for your Pokemon that you fill for every meal. However, when talking about Persian, as you can guess, the amount of food that you'll be giving them increases due to the increase in size. The average fully grown Persian will need about 6 pounds of meat a day, again split between a morning and a nighttime meal. You can use the exact same meat as you did for Meowth along with the supplements, but due to the massive increase in amount needed, then you may want to switch to buying your meat in bulk. When you feed Persian, if you end up with an untrained one in the outside enclosure, you'll be putting down the divider between the main enclosure and the offshoot room that I talked about. This will allow you to enter, clean, and refill the water dish, and then place the food dish inside. Once done with all that, you leave and open the partition back up. I would also recommend that you take the time while it's eating to put the partition back down, locking it in the offshoot room. That way you have a chance to get into the enclosure itself and clean it up a bit. Just a bit of handy advice since you won't really have a litter box in the big outside enclosure. And again, this is all if you don't have a trained Persian. If you happen to have a trained one that you trust, then there's no need for you to put the partition down and lock it out from yourself. Which leads us into the training for these Pokemon. Now, I'm sure that many of you out there are wondering, training for a feline Pokemon? Come on, Carbon, this isn't a dog Pokemon. And you're right, most people don't bother to train their feline Pokemon, thinking that they'll just do their own thing and be aloof little creatures that bond with you over time. And yeah, I guess you could do that, but that also leads to you having a Pokemon in your house that doesn't listen to you when you want it to. Believe it or not, you can actually train a feline Pokemon the same as a canine Pokemon, just with a lot more effort and a lot more time, considering that feline Pokemon aren't as adapted for listening to people as canines are. So, I won't do what I did for the bird Pokemon and give you a step-by-step guide on how to train your Pokemon. Instead, what I'll do is I'll give you tips and tricks and helpful advice on where to begin and things that'll help you along in your training. And I want to impress on you that this is very important that you do this while your Pokemon is still a Meowth. It'll be way more receptive to the training as a Meowth since Persian tend to not really listen very well, and a Meowth is a lot more forgiving of any mistakes that you make while training. And by that, I mean it won't attack you for daring to scold it like a Persian will. So, when getting into the details of training, one thing that you need a lot of is rewards. Something that'll grab your Pokemon's attention and keep it focused on you for the entirety of the training. These can be treats, pieces of their next meal if you're doing training close to a mealtime, or even a favorite toy, which these Pokemon you can sometimes love. As long as it's something that they'll enjoy. So you take that reward, and anytime your Meowth does an action that you want, whether that be sitting or scratching at their scratch tower, you reward them. You give them a reward, whatever it may be, and be sure to praise them as well. If you keep doing this, eventually they will begin to associate doing that action with being rewarded. When that happens, you begin to add in the command that you want to be associated with that action and show the reward to your cat while saying that word. If they do that action, then they get rewarded. If they don't, then you allow your Meowth to move on to something else. Then show them reward again and try to get them to do it again. Rinse and repeat until your Pokemon begins to do the action on a consistent basis. And after a lot of hard work and persistence, you will eventually be able to phase out the treats to only every now and then instead of every time. And voila, you have a Meowth that has been trained. After that, you move on to the next bit of training, whatever the next command you're working on is. After that, a few small comments on training before we move on. Training your Pokemon to use the litter box if they don't come pre-trained is going to be a very important part of training. To do this, when you feed your Pokemon after they're done eating, you take them over to the litter box, which should be in a quiet, out-of-the-way place in your home. Once they're in the litter, take one of their front paws and use it to slightly dig in the litter. This should signal to the Pokemon that this is the place that they can use to go to the bathroom. Once they do go to the bathroom, then you reward them, and do so again and again until they begin to go to the litter box all on their own. Destructive chewing can be another big problem with feline Pokemon like this, but luckily people have figured out a way to stop this pretty easily. Felines don't like bitter tastes, like most people, and you can buy a spray at some stores that you can spray on things like wires or plants that you don't want them to put their teeth on. It should act as a pretty big deterrent. Keeping these Pokemon off the counters and tables is as easy as making sure that you gently pick them up off the surface and place them on the ground. This acts as a gentle rebuttal, and if you see them getting ready to jump up again, this is where the training for sit comes in handy. Telling them to sit when they're getting ready to jump should cause them to abandon the jump altogether. If they do, then reward them, which should help to reinforce the fact that not jumping on the counters and tables is a good thing. Now, the last thing for training that I'm going to cover is something that is specific to Persian. Now, if you're diligent with the training as a Meowth, then you should have very little problems with your Persian, as by that time, it'll be used to listening to you. But Persian are well known for being precocious and sometimes even if they're very well trained, they can get an attitude and not want to listen, even start scratching and biting at you. If this happens, then there is an easy way to get them to calm down again. If you grab a Persian by the whiskers and yank, then that triggers a docile state in your Persian. This can be used to correct some unwanted behavior in a trained Persian, or even protect you when it comes to an untrained Persian if you have that for some reason. The last thing I'm going to mention in this care section is going to be cleaning, mainly involving the litter box. I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again that if you don't clean this on a regular basis, then it will begin to stink, and bad enough that you'll notice it as soon as you walk in your front door. The same with Persian's enclosure. If you don't clean it often enough, then the whole thing will start to smell of waste and meat. Scoops, soap, and water, they'll all be your best friends in this. And with Meowth specifically, you need to make sure that you keep any shiny objects out of its reach. Otherwise, you'll find them buried in the litter box, as they have a tendency to hide things there. So, any missing jewelry or coins, you may just find them the next time you scoop the litter box. Cost. So, before I get into the nitty-gritty of how much these Pokemon are going to cost you, I'm going to preface this with the fact that Meowth and Persian are going to be in two completely separate categories for everything. Like the enclosure, for example. Meowth's enclosure, it won't be that much. Some toys, a litter box, a scratching post, it's all going to be small miscellaneous stuff. You can really go nuts buying things for your feline Pokemon, like a lot of people do. And if you really do go nuts, you could end up in the very high category very quickly. But when looking at the bare minimum, you're looking at the very low category at least, which is pretty nice. Now, Persian is going to be another matter altogether if you don't have it in your house with you. The outside enclosure that I detailed for you will put you in the high category, possibly even the very high category depending on the walls and how you build it. It's just another issue with having a fully evolved Pokemon. Moving on to the Pokemon themselves, getting a Meowth won't cost you that much. Thanks to the fact that there are just so many shelters out there where you can adopt these Pokemon, you're only going to be looking at the low category for things like adoption fees and the cost to fix them. That is, unless you go through a designer breeder, which can really end up costing you anything. Persian, though, is going to be a lot more. Since you aren't going to be getting one through a shelter anytime soon, your only real option is going to be getting a well-trained one through one of the few breeders that'll sell one to you. You're probably looking at the high range for that, and signing a waiver when you do so as well. Lastly, the food for Meowth won't cost you that much per month. Since you're looking at about a pound of food every 2 days or so, if you buy meat in bulk, you'll be looking at the moderate category. However, thanks to the pure amount of food you'll need for Persian, that's going to jump up to the very high category per month, even if you do the smart thing and buy it in bulk and freeze the excess. Conclusion. Meowth is a great family pet. They can be a bit persnickety, and you should really take the time to train them instead of just letting them run wild in your house. But even if you do that, they can still be great pets for people that live in small apartments in the city or don't have much time to devote to caring for a Pokemon. They're very low maintenance. But that's Meowth. All of those things go out the window when we talk about its evolution Persian. They are so big and can be so dangerous that I can only recommend them for sanctuaries or for people that have a ton of time to devote to training their Meowth into the perfect companion. Even then, if you're gonna keep a Persian, then you better have a strong will and a brave heart. But if that's you, then this Pokemon might just be the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Thank you for listening, and please join me again next time when we cover the duck with the permanent headache, Psyduck, and its evolution Golduck. Have a wonderful night, everyone.